Welcome, everyone. Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis, people. It's the only place you're ever going to get any kind of truth from because everybody else is very distorted and being controlled by really negative, evil spirits to fulfill their own lower level destiny. That's life. So let's talk about, one of the subjects that comes up relatively frequently is, of course, when you look at ancient books of empowerment. These are generally, we call them magical texts, but it's really the science of the time. It was the occult science of the time, just like we have sciences of today to manifest so many other things. And of course, we all know that real science and real advanced sciences are things that tend to deal with the non-physical. I mean, anybody to a degree can put some chemicals together to create an effect by it. This is very simplistic, but actually manifesting from subtle energy physics, really taking the essence of energy in life and producing something out of it certainly is genius and certainly is the ultimate manifesting. So the fact that you can take crude oil and make plastic out of it, is an interesting process, but there's nothing miraculous from it. So if you could make plastic from energies alone by putting together the energetic informational fields, well, this is miraculous, but far from impossible. So we have to understand all that, and we have to understand what's going on in the bigger picture of all this stuff. So when we talk about these old traditions and what they're all about and how all this stuff has come together, we're talking about things that a lot of people think is a negative terminology, which I really could never understand it. Negative terminology should be things like religion and these kind of things, which have had thousands of years to produce something other than the rotting hole of feces they are, and have been unable to do it. So the whole idea is that, but when you're dealing with in the bigger picture of the evilness of mankind, it's hard to do anything that mankind is going to have a value with. So, but let's get back to that. The whole idea is that these ancient books, often called grimoires, which is a French term, which also has been misunderstood. They're just a basic book of a practical book of knowledge. A grimoire is something that tells you how to do something. The fact that it's the misinterpretation that it's connected to grammar and pronunciation, all that, is just nonsense. It's a how-to book. And again, people misunderstand how particularly European languages work. Well, they don't really have a literal meaning. They have a society meaning. But there's no use arguing about that, even though it just shows the lack of education by anybody who tries to say this is a grammar book. No, just not true. So, but let's move on there. So the whole idea is these are instruction manuals of their time. You could call them the new self-help people, the new Tony Robbins of ancient times, where somebody would write down, well, you do this or that, or Norman Vincent Peale, or whoever the positive thinking gurus or monkeys of this age are, to tell you how to do things. There's absolutely no difference. Now, when you start dealing with ancient books, you're talking about, again, different societies. So, and it's amazing how different our societies are, even though how similar we are with national or international media. There is now a similarity of how people dress and act because we see that as the universal custom. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We should be using knives and forks and not two little wooden sticks, which people still want to hold on to for their own personal idiot traditions. So the whole idea is that these are the type of things that we run into universally. And people want to make themselves special by being different. And of course, this is all part of, well, I'm special because I believe this or I believe that, which is just, of course, complete nonsense. But the whole idea is that these books, of course, being based hundreds and hundreds of years ago in societies that are quite different than they are today, to a degree, I mean, things are pretty much the same. But the fact is that we, people have a problem with grimoires, particularly the older ones, which tend to deal with demons, which they don't quite understand either. Now, demons, of course, are in their basic understanding are primitive entities that are basically self-centered and relatively destructive. But we have to understand that, you don't go to your priest and say, hey, we want to place a tale on Friday. And you get me some of that? So the whole idea is you don't really do stuff like that. In the basic understanding of life. So you're not going to go to your priest and ask for low-level stuff. I need this, I need that, I need my needs kept. So, it just doesn't make sense. So the priest is going to tell you to, base your life in more higher-level things. But, of course, that's a pretty ignorant way of looking at things because you need cash, money, and sex to survive. If you don't have these, you become perverse like the people in all the churches. These sick, evil people they are. So this is how all these things tend to happen. So what happens is you use the more crude things. You start hanging out on the street corner with the average person who can manifest something for you. So this is the way it goes. And, of course, these are things that are needed. And a lot of these things, of course, are also based in the higher control of these entities and so forth. So the whole idea is that using a destructive force or a very potent but primitive and low-level source like me wanting money, me wanting sex, are all the things that are primitive levels, but something that this world is made up of. To just say that these things don't exist and something that nobody needs is pretty stupid. It's a reality of life, whether we like it or not. So this is how this world works. Now, whether you should indulge in these things past what is good is where the problem comes into. Now, people say that, money is the root of all evil. Well, technically, in those goofy documents, it said the love of money, people who want money above everything else. Certainly, I believe more evil has been committed by people who need money than by people who love money. And so the whole idea is you have to go out there and your society is based on that. So there's nothing wrong with money, but what's wrong with it is when you seek it as your primary existence. You already have it like all the rich people in this world do. They have 50 cars and 60 houses and they want more money and they want to make sure the people that work for them are paid less and less. This is how it works. So there's absolutely, so the whole idea is you're going to look at things that are. So I always like to equate guns with this as well. People think, oh, guns are bad. Well, why are guns bad? They have protected a lot of people. They have saved entire countries from being enslaved. They have protected people from being murdered and destroyed. Guns have done a lot of positive stuff. But the problem is guns are based on the person holding them. So guns have done a lot of evil because of the fact of evil people hold them. So if you use a grimoire and you have a particular entity, and people want to call these demons in the reality of them, but we have to be very careful of what demons are. When you start using general terminology like Lucifer and Satan, you're talking about what is considered evil entities. And I'm not sure they help anybody with anything. They're just low-level hoodlums on the street corner looking for trouble. Now, that's not necessarily the case if you're using a particular entity that is known to bring money. Maybe you win at games of success. Maybe it helps you attract people or even is lust-based. These are things that are constant needs of people and have to be fulfilled. When this becomes an end unto itself, when there's a problem, when you overindulge, when instead of saying, well, it's nice to take a little drinker here, a little puff here, when this becomes something you do all day, well, there's a problem there. Now you've stepped over, and that's, of course, part of the human condition and what you have to fight against. But we do have to understand that there are basic needs that people have to have that are not necessarily going to sit down with a higher level person and talk about how important that is. You talk to a rich person who has lots of money, and he doesn't necessarily want to talk about money. You find all these rich pseudo-intellectual types at all sorts of New Age events. They're not interested in going to places on how to make more money. They're already doing that. They want to party. They want to talk about how it makes them feel better, like Tony Robbins says. I make the rich guys feel better that they've stolen all their money from the people. So, these are the type of things that go on that we have to understand, and people miss the reality of all these things that go on like this. So the point is that there are different energies, and again, how they're applied. Now, the problem is people cross into that. When you start using general negative entities like Satan and Lucifer, this becomes part of your reality. But if they have a particular purpose, if you have let's get back to the gun things. If you have a lot of guns around, there's a danger involved with having guns around. A lot of people shoot each other. A lot of people shoot other people in their family because they get excited. People have shot themselves by cleaning the guns because they didn't handle them. So there's lots of things. Children have taken guns and killed themselves with it, or stolen the guns and taken it outside and killed their neighbors accidentally playing, because after all, murder and death is all part of the human condition, right? We glorify it all the time. So there is a danger with that. Now, is that an acceptable danger? And are there ways to protect yourself? Well, in many countries, and even in the United States, many people put guns in locked compartments. They unload them. So they put them in gun safes. So now the gun is relatively safe. So what is your kid doing in a locked compartment? Why is the gun loaded, especially if you have undesirables around? And if you're kind of a violent person, well, maybe you shouldn't have guns so you get a little goofy or drunk or anything else. All that stuff should not be doing that. So these are all the dangers you have around. On the other hand, most people think these are acceptable dangers. And considering how many guns there are, particularly in the United States, it's amazing there aren't more accidents and problems and murders, etc. Really, it's a tiny group of people that actually are murdered and everything else. More people are killed by knives than are by guns easily. Probably think the ratio is 10 to 1. But the point is that, so it doesn't take a gun to kill anybody. So when you start dealing with these kind of tools, there are intrinsic dangers. Even if you shoot guns or have them around, or, there's been many cases where people who are scared at night, particularly wives, and their husbands come home unexpectedly, or for some reason the wife is frightened, that they shoot their husbands. This happens frequently. They're scared. Well, that's a danger of having. Now, does the danger outweigh the benefits? And of course, that's what you always look for in any situation. We do this with everything in life. There are dangers, inherent dangers to everything we do, and we justify this by the benefits are usually greater than the endangerment. So we all have to keep this in mind. This is part of the process that we generally go through. So we do have to keep in mind that this kind of use of ancient grimoires, and you got to remember that grimoires were also the pulp fiction of its time. You didn't sell books like this, and I don't know what people thought that these are kept by a few people, but books have been printed for many hundreds, I don't know, it's been thousands of years now. But the whole idea is whether the book was copied by hand or printed in a printing press by Gutenberg, and who used his press 1,000 years after the Chinese had it, but whatever it is, the whole idea is that these things were around whether it was hand copied or not. So these were things to be sold. So the whole idea is they're going to have a lot of stuff in there that's kind of fun, just like a lot of books of today that really have no proof that any of it works, but they talk about it to get you to buy the book or the product or whatever that goes with it. So we do have to understand that, again, as that bigger picture. So when you get a grimoire and you're using certain entities, well, there's proper ways to do it, just like handling a gun. You don't load the gun. You don't point the gun at people. You only die because the gun is pointed at you. So the whole idea is when you don't point it and you don't have bullets around, a gun is just a slump of metal. So it's pretty inert, and unless you use it to hit somebody with, it's not going to do much of anything. But if you're going to use that, you're going to have to be careful with it. And the same thing by using grimoires and dealing with these, what I consider negative entities. Now, again, it's the intention of using these that really shape what's going on. And there's inherent dangers. Now, if you follow things, and of course, grimoires are written hundreds of years ago, where doing certain practices were perfectly fine, particularly animal sacrifices and other things, and they may be mentioned in some of these grimoires. I personally don't change that because these are historical documents. If you're too effing stupid to understand that, well, you're a special kind of stupid. You shouldn't be using those books. But the bottom line is that the books certainly can be used in their structure. You can call on empowered entities, spirits. People do this all the time. You know, most of the world believes in comic book gods that rose from the dead, flew to heaven on a horse with a human face on it. All the kind of nonsense you run into from all of these comic book realities. So the whole idea is that everybody believes in these fantasy things, but the whole idea is to also use things properly. So if you can't handle something and you want to use a particular type of gun, let's say a machine gun, and you want to use that and you can't handle it and you shoot it and it goes all over the place and you kill a bunch of people and hurt yourself, and then of course this has something that wounds you for life, as worshiping demons would be. And let's remember, worshiping is different than using an energy. So we have to be very careful of how that works. So these types of situations and using these what are considered gray entities, and I'm not sure it's gray. Is there anything wrong with money? No. It's the love of money. Money has done a lot of things to help people. It's also done a lot to hurt people. But again, it's the intention. So is drawing somebody to you that makes your life better in a so-called lustful or relationship way, is there anything wrong with that? Well, everybody's using influence. I mean, all you have to do is get on a TV show or a crappy little radio station and people throw themselves at you. And the good guy who's working 9 to 5 doesn't get anything. So should you accept that? Accept the screwed up society? No, you use influence. Now, I don't think it's the energies that can be quibbled with here. If someone's an evil person and you plague them with a disease or you use a negative entity to hurt them, what's wrong with that? Society does this all the time. As a matter of fact, society spends 99.9% of its money on technologies to kill each other, but they're only doing it for protection. Yeah. So we have a right to murder other people and have military bases everywhere and ships on all the oceans and planes in all the air. Yeah, that's okay. So the whole idea is that this is complete nonsense. That's a rationalization of what is the bigger picture here yet again. So the whole idea, it's the implementation of a particular desire that's important. Now, if you're going to use something to get a job done, you're going to have to do it. And that means you're going to have to use something that may be a little difficult or dangerous to use. Now, if you're trying to clean up a big mess, you're going to just scrub it with water? Going to clean that grease off the floor with water? Well, it doesn't work very well. That's why I use cleaners that have chemicals in it that can go in there and change that grease there to be picked up easily. Well, isn't that using a demon? The demon chemical? The demon Windex? So it's like everything else. You use something that's effective for that thing, and you got to be a little bit careful. These chemicals aren't the great things in the world, and you want to use them carefully, probably not inhale, don't get a lot on your skin, yada, yada, yada. Well, isn't that part of what you do? So that's why you form circles, you control entities, and of course, do you necessarily want to get in bed with them and to deal with them? So when you get past the fact of using something, it becomes a problem. Now, how many people here make their own cleaning chemicals? Well, I can pretty much guarantee very few people do that unless you're making some pure stuff that you prefer. Then you're going to buy it. Most cleaning chemicals are pretty cheap, and some of them are very good. Why would you make your own? So the point is, you buy them, you use the tool or the chemical in a controlled substance manner, and then you put it away in another controlled substance manner until you need it again. You don't make it from the ground up, go out, buy the chemicals, buy the packages to put them in, the bottles, etc. This is all being streamed. And for what particular purpose? So the bottom line is that you do want to work with these kind of entities, but you do not want to worship them. This is how they trap you. And they'll give you fake promises, which they never fulfill. And of course, they want to attach to you because that's the danger of using it. Just like having a gun in your house, and maybe you're a drunk or got a bad temperature, or maybe you're an idiot and play with guns and think that you're some sort of superhero. These kind of things can cause some very dangerous results. Killing people, and this has happened many times with accidental discharges and other things that go on, and you're dealing with a demon that will kill you if you use it improperly. It's the same thing with grimoire stuff. So if you're going to use sacrifices and tie yourself to entities, well, this is the wrong way of doing it. You certainly can offer entities, no matter whom they are, as it was a friend that helped you do something, give them a beer, give them some money, whatever it is, it's certainly. But it doesn't mean you worship them and then take on the responsibility of supporting them. You give them rewards for what they did for you. And that's, of course, how grimoires are. So if you don't reward spirits, they could be pissed at you. Give them alcohol, cigars, fruits, and other things. Thank them for their assistance. You don't give them blood or kill other things for them, regardless of what the old grimoires said. And in agricultural societies, even today, I mean, we're killing things left and right all the time, and people don't think a second about it. Do you think that cattle that you just had a steak was? You think that just comes from the back of the supermarket? It grows like that? Well, it doesn't. So this was a living entity that was taken from a baby to a certain level to be murdered for your consumption. Pretty bad if you think about that, isn't it? That's the kind of society we live in. So the fact is that you have to be very careful. So you don't do those types of things, but you do offer them the rewards of whatever that may be. So you just don't give them things that they will tell you they want, but it's like any bargain. You say, well, look, I know you want that, but that's not what we do here. You're getting a fine reward. Help me, and you get this reward. And that's the way it goes. But you don't worship anything. And of course, that's the difference between a Satanist and a Luciferian and people who are using these kind of entities. Now, there's nothing wrong with these entities. Is there something wrong with money? No. Is there really something wrong with controlled lust? No, not really. None of this. That is not something that you generated. You woke up someday, you came into this world, and, well, I'm going to be lustful. I'm going to want too much money. Is that what you came in? No. This is what society tells you, and you tend to, by whatever energies are around you and whatever your upbringing is, to a degree, because you can have a lot of different urges that have absolutely nothing to do with your family structure or anything else. It's part of your personality. So the whole idea is that this is how these things work. There's nothing wrong with doing these things properly. Just like there's nothing wrong with driving. Driving a car is a very dangerous thing to do. You've got this tons of metal all around you. And half the time you're driving it, you're probably not in a good mental state. And we're not talking about being drunk. There's other times when people are drunk or, no, you're just pissed off. Maybe you're not feeling good. Maybe your eyes are blurry that day and you're driving this death machine around. So that's an acceptable risk because you got to get to work or buy your food or go to the doctor, whatever it may be. But you're probably driving when you're not in very good shape. But that's the chance you take for the reward. So using all these entities is not a problem. And generally, they don't bother you until you allow them to do that. Now, we've made a lot of simple processes to kind of access these energies without going through complicated rituals. But, grimoires give you these whole ways of doing. They're how-to books that teach you how to access those energies. And they teach you how to do it, guess what, safely, like owning a gun. So you can own a gun and point it everywhere, keep the bullets in there. Oh, let's play with the trigger and point it at my head. Or you can do things properly. Form a circle, use controls, make sure you can banishing things. Do simple but powerful techniques, and also be aware of getting rid of techniques, keeping your environment clean, all the things that go with that. So it's all there as well. So there's nothing intrinsically bad. Don't let the term of, well, it's difficult depending on how it's used again. In ancient grimoires, there is not a problem. So these are strong entities. When someone starts calling themselves a Satanism, well, they're labeling themselves with a very negative term that generally is understood to be bad. Why would you possibly do that? Using a strong chemical to clean up a really bad mess, and many strong chemicals, you got to use gloves, you got to wear a mask. Well, you're doing that for a particular purpose. And if you don't do that, you don't get the results you want. So I hope everybody makes that. Now, again, rationalizing to hurt somebody else is rationalized. You know it's wrong. Everybody knows right and wrong. This is not something that is chosen society, or everyone knows it and is born with it in a strange fashion. And this is why that is, we don't know, but that's a universal consciousness that we all agree upon. Society then reinforces that, because we can't have a society totally out of control. We can't have everybody robbing each other, murdering each other. We have enough of this when it's thought to be negative. So all of this is quite amazing. So when you get involved with all this stuff, we run into those types of problems when you rationalize it. And of course, people love to do stuff like that because, again, they're getting into their lower self, and that, again, is demonic. And there's a danger with that, because the demons will start to affect you, and they're going to tell you to give them more and do this. That's the danger. Just like when you get comfortable with a gun, maybe you're going to keep it on your next to your bed at night, and then you're going to load it and everything that goes with it. Now, there's a danger to doing that. There's a danger if there's others around. There's a danger with you even grabbing it incorrectly and start shooting at something because you're fearful. After all, the gun's there to take care of you. Why not use it? So the whole idea is these are all the dangers you get into. So you just have to understand what you're doing if you're using ancient grimoires. But these may be some of the spirits that will help you the most for a minimal payoff. And that's what it's all about, the minimal payoffs to get a bigger return. And of course, that's what life is all about. But you have to be careful. There are dangers with everything. So there's nothing intrinsically. And, you know, I talked about this in my dated but excellent handbook for the organization, which has these 100 sigils in it to get your mind going in the right direction that you view. And that's what the handbook is mostly for and about. But we also talk about, you know, what is black magic, meaning you're using negative entities, and what is evil magic. And there's a big difference. Are you working from evil, or are you just using a dark but effective power that has to be controlled? Now, good entities, or what you would call more angelic, you call upon them and assume that they're going to do the right things and not hurt you. That's part of the benefit of using that without having to control them. Well, a dark energy, which is an energy of destruction that has to be watched and contained, may do a much better job in certain situations, but has to be used in a proper fashion. And has to be controlled, and you have to be careful because they're effective, and they can go from being effective to being dangerous and then being even deadly. So that's the reality of it. So to think that there's something intrinsically wrong, but when you start labeling a book or labeling yourself as a Satanist or a Luciferian or all the other terms that go on, well, you're just trying to justify that. And then all these people step back from that. They want to use that term for whatever reason as a shock value. It's kind of ignorant to do that because, you know, if you want to get something and the color is black, right? Yeah, it's black, but it's not really black. I'm using black, but it actually is not. It's the combination of all colors. Huh? Well, that's what black is. Well, technically what it is. Well, now the point is that what is your problem? So you should be calling yourself something else, and of course, not tuning into that. Obviously, if you're a Satanist following Satan, and of course, people like to rationalize this, or Lucifer, and then they go into all the meaning. Well, it meant in Greek, and I heard it meant 50,000 years ago. It was a type of drink you bought at 7-Eleven. So the whole idea is this is the kind of stuff you run into out there. But we all know what that means. And when you label yourself like that, you're doing yourself a disservice because you spend all your time backtracking to clarify your position instead of moving ahead in what you believe. So you should be starting your own. Everybody does this type of things to justify their position, and they're using negative entities instead of coming up with their own concept because it's easier to sell on one level, but it's also much more difficult for people to understand what it means when you're using common terms. So when we understand all that, this is what the problem of doing that. But using a very powerful and potentially dangerous cleaner or substance to get the job done in a controlled, measured fashion is what we do every day. And we subject ourselves to toxic chemicals and so forth to get a result. And this is acceptable because generally you don't have other problems with it. But remember, these things can get out of control and you can infect yourself and you can die. I mean, this is a prime example of people who are using all of these resins to make all this toxic orgone garbage who ended up getting very sick because resins are poisonous. And if you breathe them in, you have a problem. And the point is, if you don't do it right and you're not using an area properly, they will kill you. Is it an acceptable risk? Well, you have to decide that yourself, and you have to learn how to use this stuff. And secondly, well, aren't there better things to use? There's a lot of natural cleaners, things like vinegar and lemon that pretty much clean anything, and they're super cheap. Are you smart enough to use those or try those? Do you have to use the toxic chemicals? Well, the whole idea is try and use better methods before that. But to ignore these ancient books of the occult scientists is kind of silly. To follow exact practices is kind of silly. A document that was written 500 years ago in agricultural or strange societies where it was perfectly acceptable to do things which is not done today. So all of this is part of understanding the bigger picture, and I can't believe that anybody doesn't get that. As I said, if you don't get that, you're a special kind of stupid. So we all know, again, what is right, what is wrong, and what would be acceptable or not. We talk about the ridiculous things of human sacrifice, using blood, perverse sexual practice. We all know this stuff is not acceptable. I'm not sure it was even acceptable back then. So if some way it said to do it in the book, no, that's a historical document. And you're supposed to, with basic understanding of society and everything else, is not get into any negative practices. And of course, you want to modify things. Now we have rubber gloves. We've had them, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 years. Well, in the ancient times, they didn't have that, so they may tell you to do things. From what I understand, the Romans, for taste, used to add lead to their wine. They would actually pour lead into the wine or grind it up, however they did it. Well, they must have had a lot of crazy mental. Maybe that's why the Roman Empire had so many weirdos and freaks in it at times. So this is a highly toxic material. So we got to understand that, if there was an ancient Roman recipe for wine, and it states to grind up lead and put it in there, it gives it a special flavor, that you would read that and say, well, yeah, I understand you did that 1,000 years ago, but we don't need to do that today. We know that that is toxic and stupid. So those are the ways you use all these kind of grimoires. And there's absolutely nothing. You modify everything. They're fascinating how-to books. They can be very powerful. They can be very effective. And they have to be used as I've just went over, which I'm not going to repeat. Hopefully this whole thing has been very strong and clear of how to use things that are potentially dangerous. And we do this all the time. Everything is potentially dangerous that you have in your house to a large degree. Your stove. Now, you cook in metal pans and you don't put your hand in the flame. Duh. Well, you may think it's duh, but that's something you had to learn. So, and we use fire like that in a controlled way and is perfectly acceptable. So it's the same thing with everything else. So that's what you do with it, and that's the reality of these types of things out of there. So that's how to understand. But anything out there can be used positively or negatively, and the nature of evil humankind is that anything that's ever been invented or used or being used for the good or invented for the good has always, in the end, been used for evil. Until next time.